In this lesson, we'll take a deeper look at Houdini's contexts. So we're picking up right where we left off with the last lesson. And what we're doing is exploring the idea of how a scene is structured inside of Houdini, where your objects exist and why they exist where they do. Houdini calls those contexts. Now, it provides several different contexts. Some are independent of each other. Some of them are actually tied together and information can cross between them. But as we talked about earlier, the analogy of thinking about the network view kind of like you would your operating system. And the similarities continue, actually, as we further explore contexts inside of Houdini. So just like we have inside of our Windows Explorer here, we have the ability to see an overall view in the navigation pane of all of the drives that we have available, and we can easily jump between those areas to get from one place to another. So if we wanted to move to a different drive here, we can just click on that and easily get to those different areas. Now, on your computer here, you may have one particular area for your documents, one for your music, your pictures, and your video. The same idea cross-applies when we start talking about Houdini and contexts. In fact, Houdini actually offers a very similar interface. Now, to be able to access that, you simply need to change one thing in your display options. Now, there's two ways that you can change these. I'm just going to right-click in an empty space here in the network view. And I want to come over to the viewing controls, which is the fourth one down here in the list, and come down to the very bottom, display options. Now, remember again that Houdini always gives you the shortcut if there's one available, so the other way to do this is just to tap D on your keyboard. And when you do, you'll get this little dialog box here. Now, there's three tabs: Network View, List View, and Common, and we'll explore some of these other options later on in the course. But for right now, I just want to let you know that you can turn on the operator tree and close this dialog box. Now, this is very similar to what we just saw in Windows Explorer. Right now, we're looking at the OBJ, or Overall Object View, and we have our box, our grid, our sphere, some of these other objects. Just as we do here, these would be the equivalent of looking at folders, right? And here's your network tree, so you can jump anywhere that you need inside of your network. Let's say we wanted to actually edit something on the grid. Well, easily enough, I can just click on the grid, and the network view automatically takes me to that exact node. And if you remember from before, the network view offers a little mini parameter view. So if we wanted to change something now, we can just tap P on the keyboard, which brings up this little floating mini parameter view, which now I can change the size or position of my grid very, very easily. So I can just come in here and make this an 8 by 8 grid. And to see the results in the viewport, we're just going to restore the network view position here. And now you can see that our grid is actually 8 by 8 units. I'm going to maximize this section of the pane in order to better see what's in the network view. And I'm going to scoot over just a little bit here. I'll tap H on the keyboard while I'm hovering here in the network view. That'll home my nodes. I'll select the grid, and again tap P. That'll bring up my floating parameters view. And I can just change this back now to 4 by 4. And now you can easily see how you can manipulate objects. Tapping P again to hide that parameter view. Notice too that the nodes, once we're below the object level, have different flags available than the ones that were at the object level. On the object level, we had the selectable and the visibility flags. Well, here we have some different flags that we need to discuss. The first one on the left is the bypass flag. What the bypass flag allows you to do is basically just to ignore that that particular node exists. So right now we have a grid, and that grid has been plugged into a color node. And we'll talk about how to generate and connect these nodes up here very, very soon. But right now we're going to focus on these flags. So to bypass, we just click on that flag. And you'll notice as soon as I did, the grid is no longer visible. Well, it's not necessarily the visibility of the node that's hidden. It's just like the grid node doesn't even exist. I'll turn off bypass, and we'll bypass the color this time. So now you can see that the grid still exists, but the color node is being ignored because we have the bypass flag turned on. Next, we have the visibility node, which is on the far right-hand side, and it works very similar to the way that visibility worked above at the object level. What it means is that you're viewing in the viewport the results of this node network as of where you have the visibility flag. So right now, you're viewing the grid, but the grid only. You're not calculating or even considering this color node because we haven't moved our display flag down that far. Now, if we want to add the color, all we do is move our display flag down to the color node, and now the viewport is showing us the result of both the grid and the color node here inside of the viewport. Now, there's two other flags that are inside of most of these nodes, and we'll discuss them a little bit later once we start working with the edit node and manipulating geometry a little bit further. Now, we won't fully get into every single context that Houdini offers in this course, but I do want to take just a moment to sort of talk about them, what they are, and what they're used for. You can see them all listed here inside of the tree on the left-hand side of the network view. I'm just going to minimize the object level so we can see the rest of the context that we have to work with here. So what are these contexts and what do they mean? Well, the first context that we see here is CH. Now, what those are channel operators, sometimes referred to as CHOPS, C-H-O-P-S. The reason for that is because they're the channel CH operators, OP, CHOPS. CHOPS are used for manipulating raw data, like the movement of objects. Sometimes if you're working with audio inside of Houdini, you'll be working inside of the channel operators as well. Now, the next thing that we see here is the IMG context. Now, the IMG context is actually referring to images. Houdini offers almost a nuke-like compositing element to its software package, and that is here inside of the IMG area. Now, you might also hear this sometimes referred to as COPS, or compositing operators. And we've already discussed the objects themselves, and we've kind of explored that in depth. So this is where your geometry exists at the OBJ level. This is where your scene is generally described, is what it's called. It's where all of the objects exist and how you deal with the shapes that you're working with inside of your scene. The next context here is called the out context. You might also hear it referred to as ROPS, R-O-P-S, or rendering operators. Now, rendering operators basically allows you to set up various types of exports and renders. If you want to generate an image out of what you see in your scene, you'll be doing that here within the out or ROP rendering operators context. Next, we have SHOP, S-H-O-P, and SHOP stands for shading operators. This is where you'll do the majority of your work with materials and with shaders inside of the SHOPS area. Next, we have the VEX context, and the VEX context you might also hear referred to as VOPs, or V-O-P, VEX operators. Now, VEX operators basically provide you a node-based interface for doing programming and scripting. And we will actually get into a little bit of VOPs and VEX operators near the end of the course. So these are some of the key contexts inside of Houdini. There are some that are not listed here in this list. For instance, if you're working with particles, those are called POPs, simply for particle operators. And also when we start working with the broken glass and fracturing elements of our scene, we'll be working in DOPS, or dynamic operators, D-O-P-S. So there's just a quick overview of the context that you can work on inside of Houdini and some of the options that you have. In the next lesson, we'll start to explore the parameter view in a little more depth.